Hello everyone, this is your boy Feltad here and welcome back to another episode of the Blue Monday podcast. Now this podcast will also now be available on SoundCloud. I've been promoting that a little bit on my Twitter and also in the descriptions of the last couple of videos. But now this video will go up alongside on SoundCloud recording so you can listen to it on the go whenever, so you don't have to watch the YouTube video. It's also pretty useful. It's always very nice to have SoundCloud. So all the episodes will be up on there just as the raw audio clip. Now last week I had my brother on, and this week it's just going to be me, the Lone Ranger, on tonight's episode, and hopefully you guys will just enjoy it just as much. So on last week's episode we've had plenty of stuff to talk about, and I and my brother both successfully guessed that Manchester City would beat both West Ham and Swansea City, although that game was a little bit tougher in the end, the Swansea City game in particular. And I also predicted successfully that Manchester City would get Huddersfield in the Cup, which was a very, very strange moment. I personally thought we were going to get Millwall for a very, very long time, and that wouldn't have been one of the most entertaining fixtures down at the Den. I'm sure City fans would probably have preferred the nice little trip down the Ale Trail to Huddersfield, and that's exactly where we're going to be playing. We're going to be playing on the 18th of February. We'll be given a 3,700 ticket allocation. Hopefully I will be there with the City fans in that section. Hopefully it'll be a really good game. Of course, Aaron Moy, the man on loan from Manchester City at Huddersfield, will unfortunately not be able to play, but it's a really, really intriguing fixture. They're currently sat fourth in the league table. They just beat Leeds on Sunday by 2-0. They've on a pretty decent run at the moment as well, and they're currently fourth on the table. Wagner, the manager's looking superb since he's come to the football club, really got them ticking. Just brought in Isaiah Brown on loan from Chelsea as well, one of the better young players in this country currently at the moment, alongside players like Tammy Abraham from Chelsea. Both of those players have impressed me in the past when they've been to Youth Cup fixtures. But first of all, I suppose after the draw, we have then faced with the West Ham versus City game, in which we demolished West Ham, to be perfectly frank with them. We beat them by 4-0, goals from Silva, De Bruyne, Gabriel, Jesus and Yaya, and the front three in that game were just absolutely electric. We started, of course, with that front three of Sané, Sterling and Gabriel Jesus. He got his first start and he certainly delivered, picking up an assist for the De Bruyne goal and also picking up a pretty much a tap-in later on from Silva, but it was still a very nice finish, and he really does look lively and he seems to have incredibly settled into this Manchester City team. Last week we talked about how well he did in that Crystal Palace fixture. Unfortunately he wasn't able to score, but what he did do was he did certainly impress us. He looked like a very strong player. He was very willing to run off the ball and stuff like that and work for the team, and considering the guy doesn't speak much English, he seems to have this unbelievable connection with the rest of his players, and so far he's certainly impressed me. Now at the moment it means that Aguero is going to have to sit out a little bit, but I'm sure he'll find his way back into the team. We're going to be discussing Sergio Aguero in a little bit of time as well. But in that front three in that last fixture against West Ham, Sané, Sterling and Gabriel Jesus were absolutely electric. I know the West Ham defenders probably weren't at their best that day, to be frank, but we made them look bad. We've got to be honest with ourselves. Sané was absolutely ridiculously quick in that game. Really impressed me. Superb down that wing. Really made great ground on that left-hand side. Brought the ball into the box. Gave good options. Also worked back as well during the fixture. He really did look fantastic for City in that fixture. Absolutely delighted with how well that front three played. And of course Yaya sticking home a penalty later, as he always does. Still yet to miss a penalty for Manchester City. Okay, so moving on from there, we'll discuss the Swansea City game yesterday. Of course, we scraped to win. I think that's the best way of putting it. We scraped to win against Swansea City by 2-1. Goals from Gabriel Jesus, once again, both of them really superb player, looked excellent in the fixture again, 2 goals, both of them was really crucial periods of the game. We scored nice and early. That's all you want from your players. You want to always come in with a first goal. We looked so lively. We set the tempo. They came out with 11 players, frankly, behind the ball, except for Llorente up front, who's always pretty much a decent option to have if they were able to ping the ball forward and perhaps catch us on the counter-attack, which they didn't. Throughout the first half, they didn't really look up for it. They looked quite content to sit behind the ball, and we created some chances, especially Yaya Toure had an opportunity to score from a corner, a few other chances every now and again in that first half, but it was Gabriel Jesus who firstly took the initiative, slotted home, nice little finish. He was always in the right areas in the box of this game, especially. buzzing around, he got in the right position and he slotted that ball past the goalkeeper Fabianski for the first fixture. I mean, he really did superbly well. He found the space, he got in the right areas of the pitch and was just able to capitalise, and that's what all good strikers do, and that's exactly what he did in this circumstance here against Swansea City. Now, in the second half, I'm not quite sure what happened, but the tempo just dipped. I think that it's partly because Swansea perhaps aren't the pushover team they were early on in the season. We still recognise that their defence probably isn't the best in the league, as seen by the second goal, but they still were a lot better second half. They came forward pretty well. Leroy Fer especially looked very, very good in that midfield. And of course, when you give the ball to Sigurdsson, he's always going to get opportunities. Now, we had a lovely chance in the second half for David Silva, and for me, he took too many touches, and this is the reason why he will never go down in City's memory as being one of the best goal scorers. Because he's not, frankly, a striker. He doesn't take his chances well enough, and he perhaps should have done a bit better when that ball dropped to him. Instead, it was a decent block from the defender, but he shouldn't really have had the opportunity to get back. He should have just smacked it before the defender was able to return and get the block in. Now, unfortunately, in the second half, I don't really know what happened, whether it's a mentality thing, but we've seen it a couple of times this season where we've just let our heads drop, and it seemed to happen quite a few times last year. In the exact same fixture against Swansea, the exact same thing happened. We allowed them to get back into the game. Bafétimbi Gomis was the man who scored in last year's fixture, but this year it was Sigurdsson. We didn't close him down. He got his shot off eventually around the 78th minute, and Swansea City got themselves their goal, which they probably deserved in the second half. They had a few chances themselves. Narsingh on the break was fairly quick. They posed a much bigger threat in the second half. Yes, there's questions about whether it was offside, but for me, you shouldn't really have that excuse. We shouldn't have had the shot in the first instance. Stones really should have come out. But I think in the second half as well, the game was crying out for substitutes. Guardiola, for whatever reason, decided to bring on Zabaleta right back and then put Fernandinho in central midfield alongside Yaya Toure. For me, it was a strange move, but De Bruyne wasn't having one of the best of his games. I've got to be honest with you, he seems to be dipping in and out of form at the moment, which is a little bit of a worry, especially with the big game against Monaco coming up in a few weeks' time. Now, it does worry me about a little element that in the second half, we did completely dip in form, and it was gagging for strikers to come on, perhaps alongside Jesus, or maybe even to take him off. And I was thinking, Aguero, this is the perfect time for him to come on, 70th minute, get a few more touches the ball, and eventually, hopefully, just steal a goal on a counter-attack or something when Swansea had a bit more possession. That's what it was asking for, but or bring on another defensive midfielder, perhaps bring Fernando on, who came on in the 94th minute or whatever, perhaps bring him on, maybe even Company. But I'm not quite sure why Zabaleta came on for Fernandinho to drop into midfield. It didn't really seem to work totally, and it was gagging out for a striker to come onto the pitch. Another notable omission yesterday was Nolito, who hasn't really seemed to play since about the 31st, or around that sort of time against Liverpool. I don't think it might even be the whole game he hasn't played. He hasn't played for a very, very long time. So it does lead me to question whether something's happened behind the scenes. I'm not quite sure about that one. Nolito, whenever he's played, has always looked like he's been fairly impressive for me. He's always done pretty well for City. He's not the paciest, I think we can all admit that, but he seems to be able to finish a lot more goals, and he's scored quite a few goals this season so far for City, more than players like Navas have done, who's just basically been sitting in the squad throughout this season, who does have his contract, which is going to run out at the end of this year. But it looks like there could perhaps be something. It could simply just be that Sané's been playing so well. At the moment, you don't really have an excuse to drop him, but perhaps it may be a chance to rotate him in those sort of fixtures against Swansea, which perhaps would look a little bit more simple on paper. But of course, he didn't play in the Crystal Palace game the week before, so maybe he's just trying to find the same team, keep some familiarity with the side. But then again, he also changed the back four once again and played Fernandinho at right back, which didn't make all too much sense to me. I think he just wanted to have Fernandinho in the side as a leader perhaps, but I'm not quite sure why Zabaleta or perhaps Sagna didn't play in that fixture. It all seems a little bit odd sometimes, Guardiola's decisions. But in Guardiola, we have to trust. We're not going to be like Arsene Wenger and Arsenal fans having to pop it in for every single game. The whole world's not going to come down every time we sort of have a bad game with Guardiola. I think we need to stick with him. We have to realise that it's a long-term project. These aren't his players necessarily at the club this season, and perhaps it's more of an experimental season. I think that's the way to look at things sometimes. And he does have to learn the league. He has to learn to be a bit more knowledgeable about what other teams are going to be able to do. Swansea City come back in that second half under a very good manager in Paul Clement. Really, really good manager. The guy's going to go on and do much bigger and better things in English leagues than Swansea, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, he has been the assistant manager under Carlo Ancelotti at Bayern Munich, Real Madrid. He also worked at Chelsea with Ancelotti. The guy's got a vast amount of experience, and I'm sure he'll do very well. And he seemed to work us out in that second half, which was a little bit surprising, but also it's a testament to how well Swansea have done so far this season under Paul Clement since he's taken a job. So, of course, after the Swansea fixture, the big talking point was the fact that Sergio Aguero was once again on the bench for Manchester City in the game. And Gabriel Jesus performed so well. He's only 19 years of age, but he's performed so well in that game. He's scored 3 goals now for City. I think he's got 3 assists in the games which he's played as well. He really is turning out to perhaps be a superstar. Let's not jump the gun too early on him. We don't want to put all too much pressure on him. I mean, we've seen that with so many players over the years. I feel like we've done it a bit with Iheanacho. United have done it with Rashford. It happens all the time. Let's not try and jump the gun on him too much. Let's just let him settle into English football. I know he's done it so well so far, but of course we do have that wonderful option on the bench in that last game in Sergio Aguero. Now, I personally felt that he should have come on about the 70th minute in the last fixture to really have an impact on the game, but after the game there has been rumblings that he may be leaving the club in the summer. That is one of the big headlines which seems to be coming out. He himself had to put on Twitter last night that he's going to see until the end of the season for the next 3 months or whatever, however long is left in the season, and then re-evaluate his options perhaps and see where we're at in the summer. He's just focusing on his football, usual media speak from that perspective. Now, it'll be very interesting to see what happens to him. I personally feel like he's not going to leave Manchester City just because he's too good to go. I mean, I feel like we would be shooting ourselves in the foot by letting this guy go. Again, with Joe Hart, we made that mistake this season by getting rid of him. I know Aguero's had a chance and perhaps hasn't performed in certain games, and maybe isn't fitting into what Guardiola perceives to be his ideal striker, which maybe Gabriel Jesus seems to be. But again, he's still only 19 years of age still. I think he's still got lots of time. We've not really been tested against a top side with him yet. I know he played against Spurs and came on and of course picked up a goal, but it was offside. But nonetheless, he did look impressive in the moment, Jesus. But Aguero needs to be there to really help us as a side. We've still got lots of fixtures left this season. We've got games, of course, in the Champions League, still in the FA Cup as well. So I feel like he's going to be playing in those fixtures without a doubt. He's still looking like a top quality striker. He's still scored 14 goals this season. Let's not forget that. And on top of that, he's missed, 9 games, 7 games, 8 games or whatever with suspension, and the guy is still up there with the top scorers in the Premier League. For me, that's a ridiculous record. He's one of the highest goal scorers per minutes played statistics or whatever, a ridiculous stat that is, in the Premier League history. He's the top of that. I mean, the guy is a phenomenal striker. He's a legend at this football club. But it genuinely wouldn't surprise me if Guardiola perhaps does sell him, because he's done it in the past. He used to play with Samuel Eto'o first season, and I've heard lots of things from behind the scenes that Aguero is a player who's a little bit lazy in training. He's not willing to put the effort in. He turns up late. We've heard that of a Frank Lampard interview, just because he's the top dog at City. And now he's got a little bit of pressure around him. Even when we had players like Tevez, Balotelli, also Xhaka, when we did used to have that magnificent front four under Mancini, Aguero was always the top boy. I feel like he was always the top man, and he hasn't really had all too much pressure around him. He's more likely to start games in the recent years, but I feel like every top team in Europe does have 2 top quality strikers, and hopefully City can keep a hold of him, because he really would be such a beneficial asset to us. And if we did sell him, it would be shooting ourselves in the foot from my particular angle. That's what I feel like anyway. But Pep's done it before. He sold Samuel Eto'o. He played him first season at Barcelona. He won the Champions League in his first season at Barcelona. And at the end of the year, he thought, you know what, Samuel Eto'o, perhaps his attitude stinks. He's going to be sold. Off he went to Inter Milan. It wouldn't surprise me if perhaps Aguero did the same. But I mean, if Paul Pogba is worth 85 million pounds, how much is Sergio Aguero worth? The guy is a god at Manchester City. He's got the best scoring record perhaps in league football. He's just superb a player. He's always going to create goals and chances as well for your team. And he's a big game player as well on top of that. And I just feel like it'd be very difficult to replace him as a striker. And if he were to be sold, you've got to look around the board and think, well, who could we bring in instead? I mean, there's currently the option perhaps is Sanchez at Arsenal, but would they be willing to sell him for a cheap price anyway, especially if they know that City have got money from selling Aguero? On top of that, I mean, there's not really all too many options on the table in world football in terms of top quality strikers. I mean, I'm going to ask this question for you guys in the comments on YouTube and also on SoundCloud to say whether you think Aguero should go, and if so, who you think should be the man to replace him at Manchester City. So that's basically what I'm going to be saying about Aguero. I'm praying that he doesn't leave because he's such a top quality striker, and I feel like we need him, and if we were to be selling him, we'd be giving our competitors in Europe, I don't think he'll be sold to another Premier League team. I think he'll be sold to one of the top sides, whether it be a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, Bayern Munich, those sort of teams. We would be shooting ourselves in the foot by losing him. That's as far as I'm concerned. The next talking point is Willy Caballero, who started in goal once again for the last couple of fixtures. Very nice to see. Happy with that. Caballero is my main man at City in the sticks at the moment. Again, I still don't feel like he's the best goalkeeper in the world, like I said last week, but he's a dramatic improvement on Claudio Bravo, who for me is a terrible, terrible goalkeeper. He's got zero confidence, hasn't adapted to English football, and once again, Willy at the weekend put in a superb performance. He made a fantastic save from a free kick from Gylfi Sigurdsson. He had to reach that one, pushed it onto the post, and then sort of pushed it back onto his hand and then out of play. Don't think he meant it like that, but it was certainly a fantastic save from him. On top of that, he looked like he commanded the defence. His kicking was good as well. He has a very, very good grasp of English. He's able to communicate with his defenders, which I feel like Bravo hasn't been able to do. I know he's been described as the world's #1 dodgeball player. It's Claudio Bravo. He's probably one of the worst signings for City this year and perhaps in our history. He's up there with Tony Vaughan. My dad, he only ever talks about how bad Tony Vaughan is, but maybe we have a new rival to Tony Vaughan. It could be Claudio Bravo. I would love to see Joe Hart back at the end of the season. I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. But Caballero at the moment is the main man. He hopefully will be able to stay in goal as #1 until the end of the season. Fingers crossed. And that's exactly what I'm hoping for. On top of that, our next fixture and our final talking point today is the fixture next Monday against Bournemouth, and they've been in a very, very poor run of results ever since that 3-3 draw against Arsenal early in New Year. They really were fantastic in that fixture. They've still got lots of pace on the counter-attack, and that is worrying. I'll talk about that in a minute, but since that fixture against Arsenal where they were 3-0 up and bottled it and drew 3-0, they've been on a shocking run of results, and of course it was compiled at the weekend by the result in that fixture against Everton. Lukaku scoring 4 goals in that one. Also Ross Barkley and McCarthy. I think the end result was something like 6-2, 6-3. It was something absolutely ridiculous in that game, but Bournemouth are leaking goals. They've lost Nathan Ake to Chelsea. He's gone back. He was recalled from his loan, and they haven't seemed to improve since then. They seem to have found a very good system at the back. They had a 5 at the back sort of formation going, and it was working really well. They've also recently decided to loan out Mark Wilson, and he was a fairly average player, but he was always fairly okay at Stoke City, and I think he's probably better than perhaps 2 of the defenders they have at Bournemouth, but he looks like he's gone away to West Brom on loan till the end of the season. That's what's been happening. And they haven't really seemed to have been that decent defensively, and I feel like we could perhaps poke holes in their defence if we played with the same front three. Whether it's Aguero at top, I don't know, but I feel like we should probably stick with this front three because it's bringing the results at the moment, especially away from home. Really quick on the counter-attack, push them back, we'll see what happens. Small pitch though down at Bournemouth, of course it's a very small ground, around 12,000 attendance as far as I know. I feel like that's around the figure it is. One of the smallest grounds in the top flight football, perhaps in the history of the Premier League anyway. Of course, it's only been going since 1991, but it's one of the smaller grounds in the current English First Division anyway, and it will be a difficult test perhaps. I know last year we were very, very good against them. I think we won that game fairly easily. I think it was 3 or 4-0 in that fixture, and I feel like we probably will get away with getting a win in this one just because Bournemouth are doing so badly at the moment, but they've been doing pretty well against the top sides when they have gone and played against them. The Arsenal game, we have to be wary about them. They've got very, very quick strikers, whether it's Josh King, whether it's Junior Stanislas. It looks like Callum Wilson's done his knee, so he's going to be out for another year, it looks like, unfortunately for him, so we wish him all the best of luck here from the Blue Monday podcast, and of course he's going to be delighted from hearing about that, of course. But they're very, very quick on the counter-attack, and that is what's wary. We have been fairly bad, but we have been showing signs of defensive improvement up until that goal, of course, at the weekend. But nonetheless, I feel like we'll probably get away with winning this one again. I'm not going to put a score prediction on this one. You guys in the comments on SoundCloud, on YouTube, can let me know what you think the score will be in that Bournemouth fixture. Next week's episode will be on a Tuesday because, of course, this game is on a Monday. So I'm going to be doing it after that game because otherwise I've got nothing to talk about. I've got nothing to say. So we'll have to leave that till next Tuesday. Make sure you tune in next week. I might have another guest or something. We'll have to see how that goes. But that is all I have time for today. Hopefully you guys have all enjoyed. Make sure you tune in next week, whether it be on SoundCloud or on YouTube. You can also subscribe or follow my SoundCloud account. That is also available in the links in the description down below. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe. Check out links in the description below. Arrivederci.